3-0 down at 3am is hardly the perfect start to a Friday morning, but it was the one Matildas fans were subjected to today, as a shaky and loose opening performance at the Paris Olympics leaves much to be desired. The Canadian football team have been caught spying on New Zealand, the Australia Cup playoff rounds are complete in Darwin, and the Central Coast Mariners retain their treble-winning coach on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and it is extremely early on Friday morning. I'm joined by Christian Montegan, fresh off the final whistle in France. How are you, mate? Are you coping okay?
It feels weird talking to you in pitch darkness. It is pretty weird, but no, we'll get into it a bit later, but the performance, the result is just obviously not what we wanted from Matilda's perspective, but yeah, we'll delve into it.
Yeah, so we are both in households with people well asleep, so we're trying to keep it as low as possible. But it was a little bit hard at times, Christian, because it was an incredibly frustrating game. Germany sat off right from the outset, allowed the Matildas to drive the initiative, have majority of the possession. And, you know, this is what we've worked for over the past 12 months. It was about developing this style of football where you could be comfortable in possession and break teams down. But they really just couldn't. For some reason, I can't really get my head around it. We reverted back to this very, very rigid 4-4-2 system, which is a lot less fluid than we've seen in the last 6 months, which I think we've actually done well. You know, Ellie Carpenter not inverting into that 6 role like we've seen in the last few outings that I thought she did quite successfully, but instead it was very solid, very rigid, as I said. Didn't allow for much maneuverability going forward. And, you know, some really lack and shaky, poor turnovers gave Germany plenty of chances. They were extremely dangerous in transition the whole game. It could have really been 3-0 by half-time. The Matildas were probably lucky that it was only one. 2 headers off corners either side of half-time. Do yous not work on them? I don't know. Maybe Sam Kerr has to have a word. But really just disappointing all around in the first game.
I think the Matildas just took a timid approach from minute one. They just looked really unsettled, had a lack of ideas going forward, and I think it was that transition game that really killed them in the end. I thought Germany were really scintillating going forward, really threatening every single time they went on the counter. That looked like they were going to score. Like you mentioned, very lucky only to be 1-0 down at half-time. And then from that point, you'd think, okay, Gustavs are going to make a change here. But no, it was actually Germany who were making the changes at half-time. And we thought, okay, here we go again. Same old story where, you know, we're going to make these late changes where the game has just gone away from the Matildas and it's too late to change anything. Because in the second half, it was basically a similar story. Yes, there were a couple of half chances, you can say. Fry had a good chance after Australia conceded the second goal, and you thought, okay, a bit of life into the attack. But besides that, it was pretty lackluster, to be fair. I thought Katrina Gorry had a terrific first half. She was everywhere.
Yeah.
She was intercepting balls, tracking back when we were exposed in the counter attack. So without her, it could have been much, much worse. But besides that bright spark, it was, little to be positive about, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. Gorry, the best player for Australia. She could only manage 60 minutes. Of course, she's still coming off an injury, so hopefully she's allowed to grow into the tournament. In terms of the selection, the only real question I have is Michelle Heyman not starting. Courtney Vine got the nod in the striker position. What it did allow was her and Ford and Mary Fowler to some extent as well to have that kind of rotation and move in and out of those positions. But for me, it's really puzzling why Heyman didn't get the nod. We've known about this Sam Kerr problem this time around, unlike the World Cup, for so long. We've had time to integrate Michelle Heyman. She's been starting throughout the qualifiers, throughout a lot of the friendlies. And, you know, she hasn't been getting a lot of goals, but she's been playing well and she's taken her opportunities, and she is an out-and-out number 9. And I think it was something that they really missed. And, you know, Courtney Vine didn't really get too involved in the game. It's just we spent so much time making sure that the Michelle Heyman solution would work. It puzzles me as to why we suddenly went away from it when it actually counted.
It came as a shock because since the qualifiers took place against Uzbekistan, she's been a real pivotal focal point in that attack. You know, starting almost every single game. Looked really promising for the most part, and you thought, okay, this is the new solution now for Sam Kerr's injury. But I question, whether Gustafsson, would trust her in these big games because she hasn't yet proven that, she can do it, on the big stage against these top elite opponents. And I don't know, Gustafsson's mindset might have been get someone a bit more mobile to get in behind the German defense. But at the end of the day, they just failed to, I guess, link up the play in the final third. And Michelle Heyman would have been that focal point there to, I guess, be the glue in that final third. And that's what we were really lacking. I thought the rotation between, like you mentioned, uh, Fowler and Ford, it didn't really work because there was no real consistency to it. I thought there was no real structure about it. And I thought, if Heyman would have started from the get go, I know it's easier to say in hindsight now, but she would have provided a bit more of an outlet, especially providing for the players around her. So yeah, hugely disappointing, but I expected to make a start in the next game against Zambia.
And what was even more disappointing for me is that like we've gone through this 12-month period where we're trying to learn, try to change. And the last few games, we got into this kind of system, which I thought was working quite well with the three at the back. This is in possession. Three at the back, Ellie Carpenter inverting into a double pivot six, and then you got the eights in the front three as well. But we suddenly get to this major tournament and playing the big teams, and you know, perhaps Tony wasn't expecting to have so much of the ball, but the Germans were sitting back and we were just in this 4-4-2 shape. Ellie Carpenter really hugging the touchline, not allowed to into that inside channel where she's done so much damage in recent fixtures. It just puzzles me because this is what we've been working for, and then we just revert back to the same old stuff. It's very frustrating. And maybe this is an opinion off a lack of sleep, and we'll wake up in the morning and a little bit later on in the morning and think a little bit more clearly about things. But I just can't understand it. It feels like they came back into their shell a little bit.
Yeah, it is annoying. I mean, I saw an interview that Gustafsson did with Samantha Lewis yesterday for ABC, and he said, I've learned from my mistakes from the previous Olympics in Tokyo, and I've become a much better coach. And you watch these performances and you think, have you really? Because to go out and completely change what you've been doing these past few months, it's looked really positive for the most part, and then to just scrunch it all up and do something different and experiment in such an important game. First opening game, you want to get at least a point on the board just to settle yourself into the tournament. They just looked a bit all over the place at times throughout the match, and you'd think, yes, if four players in the midfield would sort of solidify a bit of dominance, but even if when the Matildas had the ball, they just, like I said from the beginning, they just struggled to pinpoint passes, open up the German defense. They just looked, all over the shop. So, big moves that have to be made on the training park to sort of rectify it for the next game because, it's obviously a must win against Zambia.
Yeah, of course, that Zambia fixture 3 a.m. on Monday morning. But that'll do for Christian and I right now. We're going to pass over to a previous version of ourselves, hopefully with a little bit more energy. But we'll leave it there. Christian, thanks for helping on with me so early in the morning today.
Thanks, mate. Always a pleasure.
All right, welcome back to part two. We are the night before the Tillies kick off. We are welcoming in Poletti, sort of. It's kind of the other way around, but I guess that's how the podcast works sometimes. But Poletti, you're going to lead us off in this section talking about this crazy drone gate spying scandal with the Canadian and the New Zealand Olympic women's teams. There's been a hell of a story this week. Give us a little bit of idea of what happened.
Yeah, this would probably be the funniest story of the Olympics if it wasn't so serious, and even then, it's still just a little bit funny, depending on which sort of lens you want to look at it through. So we woke up on, I want to say it was July 23. The timeline for this has all sort of been all over the place in the last couple of days. It was a drone caught to be spying on the New Zealand women's football training session, and it was later found out that it was from the Canadian camp. The drone operator was identified as a support staff member of the wider Canada women's football team, Joseph Lombardi, and he was detained by police. That information courtesy of stuff.co.nz. Canada announced a full review into the incident. A second drone was found to have flown over New Zealand training on July 19, but was not caught at the time. Joseph Lombardi has been removed from the Canada Olympic team and sent home immediately, and he was unaccredited for the games, but was working in Paris as a member of the support team, per my understanding. Assistant coach Jasmine Mander, who, again, per my understanding, Joseph Lombardi directly reported to, has been removed from Canada's Olympic team and sent home immediately. Bev Priestman has said that she will not coach against New Zealand, but in her place will be assistant coach Andy Spence. Canadian Olympic Committee has said their staff will undergo mandatory ethics training. Now, that's sort of where we got up to until this morning, when a lot more stuff came out firing very quickly. And I say this morning, as in Thursday morning, because we're recording this on Thursday night. It's just the fact that they did it twice, I think, says a lot. And maybe they tried to push it a little bit too far. You know, you get away with it once. You know, it's like Icarus. You fly too close to the sun. Like, you got caught because you went at it the second time. Should have just been happy with the one. And then maybe you might have gotten away with it with a France or a Colombia, who are also in your group. But you pushed it twice with New Zealand. And I'm not going to be one of these people who say, oh, it's New Zealand. Why would you waste your opportunity on New Zealand? Because I think there's a lot of unknowns about this New Zealand side that something like this would have been very beneficial for. But like, to take a second bite of the cherry just didn't quite make sense to me. The French newspaper Le Monde reported this week that Prime Minister Gabriel Attal said that French security forces guarding sites said to be used at the Olympics are intercepting an average of 6 drones per day. And again, that information from the Stuff article. That's a lot of drones to be intercepting. Like, just on the balance of probability, as I said, you got away with it once. Why go back a second time?
Well, there is doing it the second time. There is also the issue of doing it at all. Spying on a team is a big no-no, and it does seem a bit crazy to me, because clearly this is orchestrated, Christian, and we don't know the full details of exactly who knew, and it just seems to me like an incredibly silly thing to do, because you go away to an Olympic game, such a big tournament. These players and staff have worked 4 years to get here. Of course, most of them their entire careers. And you're really going to jeopardize that for a little bit of training footage. And as Poletti said, even the fact that it's New Zealand, whatever, even if it was against the top team, you're really going to risk that chance at Olympic glory off a little bit of training footage?
You're right, it's silly. And you think it'd be the opposite way around, with New Zealand being the underdogs and Canada obviously coming off an Olympic gold medal themselves. You'd think, what's the rationale behind this? Why do you need to risk your Olympic campaign just for a piece of video footage for a few tactical adjustments and how New Zealand want to play their football? I mean, just do it the right way and go back on previous footage from previous games they've played, perhaps some previous meetings that they might have clashed against. But to risk your Olympic campaign is just, like you said, Lockie, just silly. And I think, for the coach stepping down for this first game, I think tells a lot to say that she did have at least some kind of intel into this sort of operation. But because if she didn't, then obviously the coach would be absolutely filthy, that this has sort of gone on behind her back if she didn't know that anything was going on, you'd think. So, from a Canada perspective, it's just, again, why do it? Because they are surely one of the favourites to, claim, one of the 3 medals. And for New Zealand, yes, you mentioned Lockie, they are a bit of an unknown quantity in terms of, on the world stage. They did play the World Cup last year, being the co-hosts, and they sort of did perform not above expectation. They didn't make it out of the group, but they beat Norway in the opening game. So that perhaps gave Canada a sense of, okay, this New Zealand outfit might, cause a couple of problems potentially. But just do it the right way. I just don't understand why you need to go out of your way and break the rules like that. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, so Poletti, as you say, the 2 people have been sent home. Bev Priestman won't coach, and they're going to do ethics training and all that. But New Zealand aren't happy with just that, are they? They want more.
No, they're not. I'll quickly jump on something that Christian said. Priestman said, by no means did I direct the individuals. I just want to make that clear that she's maintaining that she didn't direct the individuals, that she had no knowledge of it. But at the end of the day, as head coach, the responsibility falls to her. So that's sort of one of the big reasons as to why she stepped down. I just wanted to make that clear. But New Zealand aren't happy about it. They've referred the matter to the FIFA disciplinary committee, and they're seeking urgent action. That was from a statement this morning. We know that there have been some admissions by the Canadian National Olympic Committee, and they've taken their own sanctions against the Canadian team. But they're still going to refer it. The FIFA Discipline Committee will investigate Canada Soccer opening proceedings against the Federation, Bev Priestman, Joseph Lombardi, and Jasmine Manda. That was from She Scores Bang X. So Priestman said, by no means did I direct the individuals. New Zealand football has registered a complaint to FIFA and has asked that Canada not be awarded any points if they win the match. And again, that was also from She Scores Bangers on X. And I think the wording there is win the match, because if they draw, it doesn't seem like that's a request that's going to be made. It's only if they win, based on some sort of unfair competitive advantage. But I don't know if that's a FIFA issue. I think that might fall to the IOC. Like, it's very blurry here because, like, FIFA administer the competition. It's all FIFA refs, but it's taking place at the Olympics. And so I don't know if the IOC takes precedence. I don't know what the hierarchy, chain of command sort of vibe is. So it's all very, very muddled from that perspective, the way I look at it. It's just, I don't know. Like I said, if it wasn't so serious, this would be the funniest thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be hundreds of regulations worth diving through and figuring out exactly what the rules are, who has jurisdiction to apply what kind of penalties. Of course, the initial issue is the game that's being played, and there's not a lot of time to determine what to do about it. I've seen, Jason Pine, A-League commentator, obviously Kiwi, suggesting that perhaps the sporting thing to do for Canada is not just to remove your coach, but to actually forfeit the game and say, we're going to give you the 3 points. That is big, though.
It would say that, wouldn't it?
Well, of course, it's a very New Zealand perspective. I understand that, but that's an option, right?
It is, but like,
done something wrong.
It's a 3-stage group game in a 12-team tournament. Like, if you just give up 3 points like that, you're almost essentially admitting we have to win 2 from 2. That's, unless you're being told by like a FIFA or the IOC basically saying, yeah, you have to give up these points, you're not going to voluntarily do that.
I understand that, but if there's no consequence to losing, then the forfeit, the gesture in itself becomes meaningless, right? Yeah. So I don't know. It's up to Canada, at least for the next 24 hours, whatever the deal is. Rules will come down after that, but it'll be very interesting to see how they react. Christian, would they even consider just dumping away the 3 points like that, do you think?
I don't think Canada will personally. Obviously, New Zealand perspective, they would want that to happen. But I just don't think it's an equivalent punishment for that kind of crime, because yes, they've looked at their training session, but does that warrant, forfeiting a match and losing 3 points just off that? It's not a match-fixing scandal. They haven't fixed anything. Yes, they've watched a few tapes that, they've watched the live training session, but is it enough to warrant, forfeiting a match? I just don't think so. Maybe a hefty fine, but to forfeit a match like Poletti said in a 12-team tournament, it just seems, I don't know, a step too far. I know Canada went a step too far with, obviously watching their training session.
I was going to say,
it doesn't sit well with me though that you get punished in that way. I don't know.
But on the flip side of that, it's this idea of you spied on them twice. Now, I did see another tweet that I missed when I was doing the rundown. Again, also from She Scores Bangers, drone footage wasn't in possession of anyone but the operator, analyst Joseph Lombardi. So, based on that tweet, I don't believe the footage actually made it to Canada Analysis, but it's still the fact that it happened, and it happened twice. In the week leading up to the opening game.
What if it wasn't a closed training session, though?
Well, if it wasn't a closed training session, then you just stick someone in the stands. Like,
yeah, they wouldn't have needed to do it.
You don't need a drone then. It's like, when, like the Matildas, the first 15 minutes of a training session are open to media and photographers, to get, whatever B-roll footage they need or photos, or to just have a look at, the first 15 minutes of training, and then it becomes a closed session. You don't, need anything for that 15 minutes because all of it's on public record essentially through the media. But, once the media are sent away, it goes behind closed doors, and then it just becomes a case of, if you want that footage, you have to go through it, by nefarious means. I've got some stories that I don't think I can tell on the podcast about people trying to get that footage. Maybe another day we'll clear it with legal.
Okay. Well, for me, the sticking point is, has any of the information gotten back to anyone participating in the game, any of the coaches who could talk to the people participating in the game? If that, you've just said from that tweet, it appears that is not the case, in which I think that there should be no sporting sanctions. But if that line is drawn and even one person has seen something that could influence the play, I think you got to do the time, and I think the 3 points should be taken away. But we'll see how that resolves itself in the course of the next few days and weeks.
Hey, Jacob.
Yeah, what's up?
When you're playing football, would you prefer to play with an old, gross, torn-away ball with a bunch of bumps on it, or a perfectly shaped, clean one that they use in international matches?
Well, I mean, it's the easy answer. The second one.
Well, you're in luck, because Deploy Football are sponsoring this episode of the pod. Proudly Australian-owned and operated since 2012, they are one of only 2 Aussie brands to ever receive the FIFA Quality Pro license. That's the tippity-top for footballs.
I mean, that is pretty good, but, I mean, we've got the ball. There's still another problem.
What's that?
Well, I mean, with the season that Adelaide have just had, I don't really feel like wearing my United kit when I'm out there on the pitch.
That is very fair, but in that case, you can go and get your own custom kits from Deploy as well. Fully sublimated on just a 15-day turnaround with no lock-in contracts for clubs. You can even get your own custom footballs. They've got the largest range of program-specific footballs in the country.
Nice. Sounds to me like we need some gear for the pod.
That is a very good idea. We will have to get on to them about that.
Yeah, we should do that. It would be sick.
Deploy are proud partners of state federations all over the country and offer clubs and individuals the best value for money on footballs, teamwear and equipment. If you want to get the best for your club, head to Deploy and let them know we sent you.
Let's move a little bit closer to home for the Australia Cup. And David Zrilic is off to a good start at Perth Glory with a 4-2 win over the Brisbane Roar up in Darwin. Christian, we've talked plenty about his impact on the Sydney FC side last year. The fingerprints of that notorious press in its early stages of development, it must be said, but they were there in this game in the top end. Perth dominated the early stages for me. They were playing well. Brisbane couldn't get out of their own defensive third for around the first 15, 20 minutes of the game, something like that. After that, it is pre-season. They didn't quite have the legs and the cohesion, perhaps. And this is a style that will take time to develop. So Brisbane did start working their way through after the kind of that quarter hour, 20-minute mark, and got their first goal against the run of play through Keegan Yelisic, who, by the way, I think is a brilliant piece of business that Brisbane have done in this off-season, getting him on an extension of that loan for another 12 months. But from there, Perth, 4 goals to the good. What can you say? They were terrific, and 2 players for me really stood out in this game. One young, of course, everyone's talking about him, Abdel Faisal, scored the penalty, scored a nice brace as well. And then David Williams, he didn't get to start a lot of games last year. He was the superstar off the bench that saved them on multiple occasions. But he wasn't afraid to show the kid who's boss, in this game. Took some shots for distance, took on Macklin Freak, got his goal after a great combination from Josh Risden and Brandon O'Neill, who will be a great combo for Perth, two other great additions to their club. And then that inch-perfect pass as well into Nathaniel Blair. He, for me, was, took the cake in terms of individual performances in this fixture.
Yeah, it's ironic how they played Brisbane Roar, because they actually reminded me of the Brisbane Roar from last season in the Australia Cup, where they made it all the way to the final. Just their high press, the high intensity that when Ross Aloisi was obviously there previously, he instilled into that side. And I saw a lot of that same sort of character from this Perth side in this match, going up, 4 goals, obviously towards the end, tiring legs, as you mentioned, Lockie, but you can tell this really blueprint was really there on full display. And that's pretty scary, knowing that he's only been there for, a few weeks or a couple of weeks now. So obviously not a lot of time to get his ideas across on the training pitch, but on the field, like a player like David Williams didn't have the poorest of seasons last season, but in this game you can tell he was a bit more free. He was linking up with players more, just had more of a set role, I guess, and you can tell he was just a bit more relaxed than, the goal showed it, his link-up play with his teammates. Brandon O'Neill in the midfield, I thought, was really instrumental in this game, pulled the strings, sort of kept it all compact in the midfield between the defence and the attack. So yeah, there were a lot of positive bright spots there. Early days, obviously, against the Brisbane Roar side who have their own sort of issues off field, and they're sort of gained together their own sense of stability. Compared to last season where there were a lot of chopping and changing. So like I said, early days, but positive signs early for this village to build on.
We'll go to the Western Jets game and we'll talk about these two games as a pack. And of course, you can never read too much into these preseason games, but for me, this was worrying for Western United, down 4-1. And what really concerned me was the lack of work rate, to be honest. It was really that simple. Ben Carruccio's horror own goal, it just seemed like a lack of care. Like he just kind of placed it in his own goal. There was no commitment to clear high or clear wide. He just kind of went halfway in between and ended up, finishing quite nicely, really. The other two goals in the first half were second phases that they just failed to deal with. There wasn't the drive and the determination to get to those balls. And Aquilina and Grimaldi finished well, but I put those goals down more to the Western United defence. So, it is pre-season. Fitness won't be there. The tracking back for Aquilina's second was not existent as well. There was no one even close on the far post to try and stop him score that goal. So, sometimes forgivable in pre-season, Poletti, but not a good sign, especially when you compare it to the Jets, who were up for it. They were motivated.
Yeah, they were, and I think based on the limited parts of this game that I did watch, I had other commitments on Wednesday night. Thank you, NPL Women's New South Wales. I think that the Jets just I can't quite say new manager bounce because that's what happened with David Drillage. Robbie Stanton's in his second year. Can we call it a new owner bounce?
You can't call it new manager bounce at all. Even the owners were last season.
Can we call it a new owner bounce or something?
How about they just won a game of football?
No, because that's not a good story. We need to create a narrative here.
All right, well, let me give you the narrative then. Obviously, we're going to talk about transfers later, but the big one for the Jets is the loss of Apostolos Namatalopoulos. And now he's gone over to Scotland. They signed Lachie Rose expecting him to be in this kind of partnership. At least that's how it was reported by the Newcastle Herald. All of a sudden, Stammer's gone. Lachie Rose comes in. And for me, he was one of the most encouraging players because his first game in pre-season, it's a playoff up in Darwin. We talked about Western United and perhaps, the care factor wasn't there as such. You hope that resolves itself when it comes time for the A-League proper. But Lachie Rose was putting in the effort. He was organising, he was talking, he was running. I think he's noticed that this is his season. This is his chance. He's going to get a lot of A-League minutes and he's got some time to prove that he can really do it at this level. And it's a good first step for him.
Yeah, as someone who's watched quite a bit of Lachie Rose and MacArthur, I think that it's always been clear that it's just been there on the precipice. He's just never really got the minutes to build into things, right? It's always been 10 minutes off the bench here, 15 here, 5 here, 20 there. Like, he didn't have a lot of minutes last season. Probably his most spectacular moment is coming off the bench in that AFC Cup game that MacArthur went on to lose. Less than 60 seconds into extra time, he gives MacArthur, I want to say it was a 2-1 lead at the time. Just went in and celebrated with the bullpen. It felt like it was a coming out moment for Lachie Rose, and then didn't see a whole lot of him again for the rest of the season. It's just like this, as you said, this is his year. Unless the new owners decide to reinvest some of that transfer fee for Stamatolopoulos, it's probably going to be Lachie Rose leading the line in a 4-3-3. And I want to see him do well, but maybe there's just a little bit too much responsibility too quickly.
Well, either way, it's going to be a sink or swim kind of scenario, isn't it? He is going to be in there. The Newcastle Herald also reporting that the Newcastle Jets will look to bring in a foreign striker. That was a general term, not someone specific. So whether that happens or not before the start of the A-League season, or more specifically the closure of the transfer window, remains to be seen. Of course, they can still sign free agents. But for now, it is Lachie Rose's spot, and he's going to get the minutes every week and throughout the Cup run and the start of the A-League. until they get someone else. So it is his chance.
And the advantage is, as you said, they've got a cup run to deal with it, which is a good thing. I assume he'll start against Rockdale Illingdon next week, which is where the downside comes into it, is that they have to go face Rockdale Illingdon, who are absolutely tearing it up in NPL New South Wales men's this season. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that on Tuesday's episode before the Australia Cup kicks off. But yeah, it's good in the sense he'll get the minutes. The bad news is they've got to come up against Rockdale Illingdon side that's just absolutely tearing up the competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Christian, when you look at these two games as a pair, very, very early in A-League preseason, you got to be wary, drawing too many conclusions too strongly. But what do you take away as the biggest lesson out of these pair?
I mean, like I said, it's very early to tell because, if you're Western United, you've come off a very disappointing campaign last year. Surely that's the motivation you need early on to say, okay, we're going to make a clean state. We've got our new stadium, fresh start, fresh season. And, to come out with that sort of lackluster performance, it's really telling of their attitude, I guess, because it should be the complete opposite of their mindset that, they're obviously the football they displayed last year wasn't up to standard. And I'm just worried that, because I questioned it last season on the pod, whether, has Aloisi coached this team one season too many? And I just think they're null of ideas and they just need, a fresh voice at the helm. That was concerning for me. Other players really buying into what he's trying to portray on the pitch. I'm not quite sure. But, the opposite, can be said for the Jets. They were, terrific, from the first minute right to the 90, to be honest. The intensity they showed right throughout was, really telling. And yeah, like I said, compare that to Western. If that's the attitude they both bring into the new season, then I really worry for Western, to be honest.
Yeah, of course, there is plenty of time to change it around, but Poletti, as you've alluded to, the Jets get the benefit of a cup run to keep that momentum going, where Western now have to deal 80, 85 days without a competitive fixture before the A-League starts, so there's less opportunity to kickstart that attitude and kickstart that motivation and that drive. So, as we say, still very early days, but they've got a long road ahead. For me, Poletti, it's Perth Glory that have made the biggest impression on me. They only had a 2-goal margin. The Jets had a 3, but I think that was overstating it a little bit. If you want to do the numbers on it, their 3 first half goals came from less than 0.5 XG. So take of that what you will. Clinical for sure, but they didn't generate too many great chances. But you can see the first impressions of Zrilic's system working into that Perth Glory team. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but they're going to have a very young, impressionable side. They're going to do what they're told. He's going to teach them. We've talked about this as well, but part of that Leipzig education is not just how to play the football, but it's how to train the players to play the football, right? So they'll go through a process. It might not even be ready by the start of the A-League season, but it will kick into gear at some point throughout the year, and they're going to smack some teams. They're going to have some big wins, I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think they will. I think the fact that, as I wrote in an article as you can read at roundballaustralia.com.au, that you could very clearly see glimpses throughout the first 45 minutes of what Zrilic is trying to implement in terms of the press. But it also just seemed clear that this is very much a preseason side that's in their first competitive hit out of preseason against similar quality opposition. And they just weren't quite able to pull it off at times. For me, the two big storylines out of this, as you've already mentioned, David Williams, absolutely superb. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing him hopefully get a chance to work together alongside Adam Taggart this season in this sort of like 4-4-2, 4-3-3 pressing system that the Zrilic wants to implement. I think that'll do wonders for the Glory, and hopefully it will be a very quick turnaround. And the other big talking point that I've got from this game is how well Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Michelangelo was in goal for Brisbane Roar. Just an absolutely brilliant performance. I wonder where this individual has come from. No, actually, but Macklin Freak did an amazing job. Lockie's giving me the absolute side eye. It was the green goalkeeper kit with the orange. Just the way it blurred together made it look a little bit like Michelangelo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I love these jokes that make Lockie absolutely clueless.
Lockie's done with my crap, honestly. But no, honestly, like I thought Macklin Freak put in an amazing performance, even in a 4-2 loss. I don't think too much of what happened was his fault. And I think if he can keep that up for Brisbane Roar, then they should have a good season if they can, as long as they've got the solid foundations at the back. But similar to Western United, they're going to go almost 3 months without a competitive fixture.
Well, if you haven't given a go to our new video podcast form on Spotify and on YouTube, the last couple of minutes would have been very entertaining. So give it a go if you want to. But I think you're right, Poletti. Macklin Freak is a good keeper for mine. He's a good shot stopper. He's very good with his feet. He's not afraid to be involved with build-up as well. So he just needs match minutes. He'll get another A-League season under his belt. And I think he has good potential. I'm going to throw out a really wild early prediction, but don't be surprised if he gets a transfer to Melbourne City. That's my pick. Watch out for that in a couple of years' time. But let's go to transfer news that is currently happening, and we can talk about some confirmed moves. And of course, the big one isn't a player at all, but it is a coaching team of Mark Jackson and Danny Schofield. The Central Coast treble-winning management team has signed a 3-year contract extension each. They will stay at the Mariners till the end of the 26-27 season. Of course, things can happen. You can get paid out, all that kind of stuff. But Christian, extending the treble winners as your coaches, especially when they've just gone through losing Monty away overseas, that's big, big news. And I'm sure we'll put a few quick heart rates of Central Coast fans to rest.
Yeah, absolutely massive news because, like you said, the Mariners supporters would have been a tad worried that there might have been an offer or two coming the way of Mark Jackson with the unbelievable season that he displayed, winning the treble. I thought there might have been some interest from overseas, potentially back in the UK, that might have wanted Jackson's services, but clearly he's happy at the Central Coast. He's working towards a great project, which, what more can he really achieve? He's won the treble. Probably next is the Asian Champions Elite to try and make a deep run there. And hopefully they do well. But I mean, in terms of their project, as long as he keeps that core, we know, obviously, they've lost a couple of players in the off season, which is understandable. But even from last season when they lost Jason Cummings to India, I mean, they still were able to regroup and, I guess, maintain that same blueprint in terms of their attacking philosophy. And they were really exciting to watch last season. So if they can, bring that same identity into this season, then, I'm sure they'll be set for another cracker of a season.
Yeah, but just go get another coach from Scotland, bring him in, lose your first 4 games, everything will be all good, get a 3rd trophy, a couple of kids out of the academy, they'll be fine. The Mariners have done this before. It works. It works until it doesn't work. That's how it works.
I'm worried about the Central Coast Mariners, and I'm really torn because I felt the exact same way last year, and obviously they proved everybody wrong. But they lost the core of their team in that championship year. They're losing their core this year. They've already lost, correct me if I'm missing anyone, but Josh Nisbet is gone. Max Ballard is gone. We're about to talk about Jacob Farrell, who is about to announce his move to Portsmouth. They've lost Vukovic in goal. They've lost Stan Hall to Auckland. That's a big list already of key vital players that were critical to that treble. They've managed to re-sign Mikhail Docker. They've managed to re-sign Miguel DiPizio. But it's not enough for me. And again, everyone was saying this last year and they went on and won the treble. But I just think you can pound those transfers on top of each other. I'm a little bit worried about them.
I completely understand your points, but also we've seen this from the Mariners that they just have, the last couple of seasons, have found a way to do it. I think the big unknown this season is going to be the introduction of the buy round because Auckland is coming in. and I wonder how that will disrupt the team chemistry, because we saw, and heard from Mark Jackson last year that part of what kept them together was this backs against the wall mentality, playing basically every 3 days for significant portions of the season. So the fact that there will be some built-in rest might go against them if similar tactics and strategies are going to be employed. On the flip side to that, the fact that there is an extended, can you call it a group stage of the Champions League Elite? I'm not sure.
League stage.
The league stage of the Champions League Elite means that instead of playing 6 games in your group stage, you're playing 8 games in the league stage. And there is different travel requirements for that compared to what they were going through with the AFC Cup. So I think those are going to be 2 big factors that might just suggest that, hey, maybe what we did last year won't work as well as it did. But that being said, as I said a couple of minutes ago, if it's working, it works until it doesn't work. And the only way they're going to find out if it won't work is by doing it.
Yeah, very excited to watch them in the Cup next week. I forget who they have off the top of my head.
Heidelberg. They play
Heidelberg
on
United.
August 7, I want to say off the top of my head.
There you go. Okay, so I'm interested to see how they go in their first preseason outing, for sure. But let's get on to some other transfers. And of course, we knew, Christian, that Tolgai Arslan was leaving Melbourne City. They, in their own words, reluctantly agreed to end his deal early. Now, Marco Monteverde was reporting this week that family reasons was the reason why Tolgai asked to leave his contract and play somewhere closer to home. However, it has just been confirmed that he is signed for Sanfrecce Hiroshima in J1. It's probably a little bit closer to home, but not by a whole lot. He's going to Japan to start a new chapter. And reportedly, part of Monteverde's report as well, that apparently City failed to offer him another contract on the exact same terms. He still had a year left to run, but reportedly there was some handshake agreement that he would be offered a contract longer than that. That didn't happen, which upset Arslan. He asked for the family reasons move, and now City are upset that he signed in Japan. So a very ugly way to say goodbye to, as we said before, probably the best one-season player in the A-League. We would have loved him to stay, but it's just not going to be that way.
I don't fully buy the family reasons side of it, because moving to Japan, is that really for family reasons? I think there's a bit more to it, and like you mentioned at the bottom there with the contract extension, that agreement that they supposedly did have, it's head scratching that sort of didn't go through, because obviously from the statements you've read that City were disappointed to let him go. But if he made the move to Germany or Turkey back in Europe, then you'd say, okay, fair enough, it's for family reasons. The reports were that he was going to move to Schalke. That obviously didn't happen. New adventure for him in Japan. All the best to him. But yeah, for City, it's going to be just a massive void to fill. He was just, you could tell he was incredibly talented, got the IQ. He's one of those players that a team really can't afford to lose in the A-League. And for City, who are sort of find themselves in this transition period, it's not the same City side of years past. To not be able to hold a player of that sort of caliber, I think for at least the early rounds of the season is really going to hurt them. They're going to have to really find a solid replacement for him to really back it up.
And they're also, of course, going to have to contend with the absence of Jamie McLaren. We've learned Poletti, he is confirmed moving to India to Mohun Bagan on a 4-year deal. That's the same side that Demi Petraros and Jason Cummings have been playing for. They won one part of the Indian Super League. I forget if it was like the regular I think it was the regular season, and then they have the final series as well, like Australia, that they didn't win. But trophy winners in India, and they now have McLaren there as well, scoring goals for them.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I know too much about the Indian Super League. My knowledge of the Indian Super League comes from late nights watching Fox Sports when I was absolutely bored out of my mind. And I was like, oh, here's football. I don't know who's playing. I don't care. It's football. Look, I think that this is definitely a good signing for Mohan Bagan. I absolutely love the announcement video of it. Really was different gravy. I think it's only going to be a matter of time until we see what actually happens. I don't think McLaren will see out the entire 4-year deal. I think there'll be some sort of transfer somewhere, maybe back to the A-League, or perhaps somewhere else. Like I said, I don't think he'll see out his 4 years in India. We've seen a couple of names go across in recent years that haven't necessarily seen out their full deals either. Believe Adam Lafondra didn't see out his full deal. Paulo Rattray has, left FC Goa with 1 year left on his deal. So there is certainly a precedent there. But that being said, if the money's there, then, the money's there, and maybe that's enough reason to stay. It's also probably the last we've seen of McLaren in a Socceroos jersey for a while.
Potentially, yes. I tend to agree with that assumption. Tick off a couple other transfers that we kind of knew were happening, but now official. We mentioned Stamatoulopoulos to Motherwell. That's being reported by Anthony Joseph, who's a Scottish reporter, to be about 500,000 Australian dollars. So a nice little pickup. He reportedly rejected 2 other offers from the Middle East as well. He's spoken before about how he wants to earn Socceroos caps in the lead up to the World Cup. So he's obviously decided that Motherwell is the best place to do that for him. Finn Sermon off to the Portland Timbers, and Lockie Brook to Real Salt Lake, or Real Salt Lake. I'm not quite sure what that one is. But both in the MLS. That Brook deal is 1 year with a club option for 2 more. So a couple more Aussies off to the MLS. They're starting to grow a rather large contingent in America. Hiroki Sakai is the Japanese defender, first called by Andy Harper to go to Auckland FC. That is their first confirmed visa player. He is locked in. And then that brings us to Patrick Yazbek as well, who, of course, not coming out of the A-League, but was part of Sydney FC's academy. He's got a transfer also to the MLS from his Danish club Viking. Now, firstly, very interesting stat, he played 39 games for Viking, which is the exact same that he played for Sydney FC. So when he gets to a season and a half in the MLS, just watch his match counter to see where his transfer is going. But he reportedly is around a 4.4 million Australian dollar fee, which puts him up there with some of the most expensive Australian players of all time. And Poletti, the big news for Sydney FC is that they do have a sell-on clause, and the value of that is not known specifically, but they will profit from this deal.
They will. Actually, it might be around this time next year that it'll hit the 39-game mark because of how long the MLS season is. Then you throw in the playoffs, you throw in the league's cup that they play as well, the US Open Cup. He could hit that 39 target very, very easily. But yeah, this is just the latest in a long series of signings that are just, flocking over to the MLS as you've just ran them through the list. This is a hotbed for Australian footballing talent at the moment. It's, as I've mentioned on the pod in the last couple of weeks, it's a growing pathway into Europe. A lot more European clubs are taking a direct look at the MLS compared to what they have in recent years. But that sell-on clause for Sydney FC is going to do absolutely wonders. Even if it's only something in the vicinity of 5%, that's still, quick math off the top of my head, 220? 200, 220, something like that. Not an insignificant portion. That's 2.5, 3, salaries for scholarship players. On that $75,000 a year at last check, I think is the minimum that a player has to be contracted for. If it's a little bit less, so somewhere in the 2.5% range, that's still, a scholarship academy player. Like, it's not an insignificant portion of money. Stuff could go back into the footballing department. Like, this is a lot of money to be coming back into Sydney FC's coffers based on, this sell-on clause. And I don't quite know where A-League clubs are with sell-on clauses, but the fact we're seeing a lot of players being released, they're going off on free transfers or something like that, indicates that sides probably aren't taking as much advantage of this as they should. And hopefully that changes in the future, especially given the fact that the A-League is cash-strapped, as we know at the moment, and the clubs are. And it is Real Salt Lake.
Real Salt Lake. Thank you for that clarification. But yes, no, you're right. It'll be very interesting to see, the use of sell-on clauses, because Sydney FC have obviously profited very well here. Now, another interesting, different kind of transfer move, and Christian, we might have to word up some of our South Australian correspondents for a little bit more information on this one. But Adelaide United are set to sign Dutch 19-year-old winger Julian Quaitel. Now, this is reported by Dutch outlet ED. He's supposedly being released by PSV, set to sign with Adelaide United, and then being loaned back to the Netherlands to FC Eindhoven. Now, of course, same city as PSV. I'm not sure I haven't looked into how the ownership of all this works. We know that Adelaide have close relations with PSV now. So there's a lot going on here. I can't quite make sense of all of it, but something's happening.
Obviously, 19 years of age winger. Obviously, we haven't seen any of him, if not anything at all, of him overseas playing in the Dutch league. But you'd have to think that Adelaide have done their scouting network and their scouting reports to pick up a good talent. Just wish we had Jacob on the podcast tonight. I'm sure he's been frantically, researching him and analysing, all the tactics and what he's got to offer to this Adelaide side. But I mean, with the departures that Adelaide have seen recently, obviously the biggest one that stands out is Iran Kunda. I think in those wide areas to get to tout a young talent, from overseas, only 19 years of age, like I mentioned, I think it's worth taking that punt. From the season that Adelaide had last season, surely, I guess you take that chance. Like I said, though, if the scouting report is accurate and they've done their research, it can work out well. But like I've said in previous podcasts, you never really know with these types of players until they set foot in the league. And the other advantage is that, obviously being young, I'm sure his future ambition is going to want to be playing back in Europe. So it's not like they're signing a 35-year-old who is sort of dwindling down to the end of his career. He's surely going to want to prove a point, not only to himself, but clubs around Europe to say, okay, I'm serious, about, taking that next step up. And that's surely the advantage that you've got to look at it from.
Yeah, I honestly wonder if this deal is with the intention of him ever playing in an Adelaide United shirt. I honestly have that question, and I wonder how much this is being told from PSV to Adelaide that this should happen and get loaned around because money moves in weird ways. I'm not sure. It feels weird to me that he would get an overseas signing and then just loan to the team down the road in the Netherlands, Poletti.
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to is there has to be some sort of financial benefit here to Adelaide United to doing this because it makes no sense. Released by PSV, sign with Adelaide, go to FC Eindhoven without ever stepping foot in Australia because documents can be signed online and all of that, so it doesn't actually have to physically step foot in Australia to make this signing. Like, someone's got to be paying the wages, right? Yeah, Adelaide United can't afford to pay the wages. Is FC Eindhoven taking on everything? But like we know money talks, right? As I said, there has to be some financial benefit to this. I just can't see it. And it's just on this whole, sign and immediately loan out. We know that this happens in football. I just don't understand why Adelaide United is the club that's doing it because I think, again, I know this is a slightly different situation. I believe it was Adrian Segicic last year, signed a new deal with Sydney FC and then immediately loaned out to somewhere in a similar part of the world. I think it might have been the Dutch League as well. I'm not 100% off the top of my head. So it's not like a sign and loan is, an unprecedented move in football, but I just don't understand what Adelaide United get out of this, or just what the financial thing is. And maybe there's something in a contract or something that states that a player can't go directly from PSV to FC Eindhoven because of some sort of crazy Dutch rule. Like, I don't know, but I don't know what the benefit is here.
So the first thing I'll say is the benefit doesn't necessarily have to be in this transfer because we know they've got the relationship with PSV. They have the new Dutch sporting director. They've signed Bart Vriends, who is also Dutch, so there's obviously relationships there. So the benefits could be in different places. But you talk about players going to clubs and loaning out. You're right, it does happen. But I'll use a European example to say the most common scenario where we see this is with multi-club ownership. Now, I'll bring you the player Savinho. He's a Brazilian. He's part of the City Football Group. He was Troy's, that's Patrick Kisnorbo's ex-club. He was their record signing, biggest player they've ever signed. what happens? He gets loaned out to Girona and has that record-breaking season in Spain, and now he's getting a transfer to Man City without even playing a single game for Troy. So it's usually these club network scenarios where these kinds of deals happen, which I wonder tells us more about the relationship between Adelaide United and PSV than it actually says about the transfer itself. So there's a lot to play out here, but Christian, I think it's fascinating.
So I just want to jump in super quickly. It's Trois, per my understanding, and I'm sure Jacob will butcher you. For that.
I've been saying Troy's for like 100 episodes.
I'm under the impression it's Trois.
It's too late to go back now, Lockie.
And he didn't pronounce the Italian club right, did he, Christian? Or am I under the wrong impression there?
I sweep that under the carpet. Let's not knock on Lockie tonight.
Okay.
No, but
Jeez, I'm still saying like the letters correctly. It's just like an accent thing.
It's a learning thing. Don't worry. No, but it is interesting. Like Poletti touched on, they made a good point about. I guess it just has to be about a financial benefit, because what else are you going to get from it? He's not going to be playing in that first season unless there's sort of a last minute thing where he doesn't get loaned out. I know he plays a few games, and I know they're decided to keep him for a season, but I just don't see Julian's ambition playing in Australia for a year. So besides a financial benefit, then what's the advantage that Adelaide get from it? I just don't see it. So surely they get a portion of the deal financially, but besides that,
Well, they own the player, right?
Yeah, they do. And like you said, they've got that connection with PSV, and that's obviously for future transfers down the line that they can tap into, which is obviously a positive for them. But yeah, if it's not financial, then what is it? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. All right. More to come on that, I'm sure. Poletti, I'll give you 60 seconds on this because we are running out of time for a normal podcast, and I'm very aware that we're going to be recording an extra segment tomorrow morning. But our friends at Front Page Football are reporting that Campbelltown City head coach Michael, Christian, you better pronounce this for me, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. Michael Matriciani will be appointed as the head coach of Melbourne City's A-League women's side. He's a South Australian coach. Reportedly, FPF are saying, moving over to City, that we thought they were going to hire internal, but it turns out they've gone external and bringing someone else in.
Yeah, they have gone external. I'm not going to pretend that I'm Antonis and know a ton about NPL South Australia. New South Wales is my bread and butter in my backyard.
You're not an SA great.
No, I'm not on the SA Great. I have been recruited into the SA Great campaign at times, but I'm not completely across it. I think that the fact that they're going external says a lot, given that their last couple of recruitments have been internal recruitments. Rado Vidicic over to the men's side, replaced by Dario Vidicic on the women's side of things, if you ignore the Aurelia Vidmar signing. But yeah, overall, I think Melbourne City would be doing their due diligence, particularly with the ACL commitments coming up. I think that they know that they need to get this coaching appointment right. They can't afford sort of a transitional year. I'm sure we'll find out more in the coming days, and we'll be able to have a better discussion about this on Monday's episode.
All right, sounds good. Let's do exactly that, but that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thank you again to Deploy Football for supporting our show and our coverage of the Australian game. Christian Montegan, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning to wrap up the Tillies.
Yeah, I've just got the alarm set for 10 o'clock, so 11 minutes till bedtime, and then we'll be getting up just before 3 a.m. for the big match. Can't wait.
And Poletti as well. I thought we had you. What are we doing? Short-term loan for a couple of days? You're sleeping in? What's happening?
Oh no, what happened?
I'm still recovering from a bout of sickness from a couple of weeks ago. And so I just
failed the medical.
Yes, I failed the medical. That's a flashback to Monday's episode. I failed the medical. I'm going to try and retake the medical over the weekend, and hopeful that I will be awake for Monday morning's 3 a.m. contest. And then to conclude the group stages against Zambia and USA respectively. But yeah, no early morning wake up for me against Germany.
All right, we'll try to get it pushed through in the next couple of days. We'll be back on Tuesday to recap the game against Zambia as well, of course, and we'll do a little preview of the round of 32 for the Australia Cup as well. But thank you all very much for listening to this episode. Goodbye.